There you go.
Thank you.
All set, Muriel?
I am all set. Sorry, it was moving slow.
No worries. Well, thanks. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. As John mentioned, my name is Mike McClarty. I'm the current chair of the Empire State Forest Products Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody today. This is a significant meeting because it's meeting 5 of our 5-meeting series that we've had this fall as part of our regional meetings. And, you know, I couldn't be more pleased on how things have gone. And I think we're in for another great informative meeting today to wrap things up. As a reminder to the membership, these regional meetings are something we've been doing for at least the past 5 years. We usually go around to different parts of the state to see our members and have them in person. Last year, we had to switch to digital or virtual, I should say, because of the COVID situation. This year, our plans were to have it in person, but due to the uncertainty, we felt it prudent to change to this virtual format. But I do want to acknowledge the staff. Once we made this decision, they have done a tremendous job of setting up a virtual series, including attracting a lot of great speakers, which I know we're going to have a couple great speakers again today as well. So the purpose of today's meeting is really threefold. First, it's to reconnect, even though it is virtual. We don't get a chance to reach out to our members enough and reconnect, and this is one of the ways we're doing that. Second, there's some organizational business we need to take care of today, which I will lead later in the meeting. And then third, we hope to provide value to our membership with an informative topic and great speakers. And I just want to touch on that concept of value for a minute and the organization. That is our sole purpose as an organization, is to provide value to our membership. We are your voice for advocacy in the Albany area and across the state as well. But every day our staff come in and try and fulfill the value proposition we promised to our membership. And but we are only as strong as our membership's involvement and our support. And so today, and you know, always, I encourage you to be involved, give our staff and our board feedback on what we can do to better serve you. Again, we work for you. This is your organization, and we think that we do a great job, but we're always open to direction from that membership. That value that I've talked about doesn't come easy, and I think there's 4 groups of people I want to recognize in my opening comments and thank. First of all, our staff, John, Muriel, Joanne. Couldn't ask for a better group to lead the organization. Not just tonight, but all year you demonstrate amazing work, and I thank you for that. Second, to the board, I want to thank my colleagues on the board, taking time out of your regular leadership roles in your companies to help lead this board is so critical, and I think you guys have done a great job. Third, as I said, we're only as strong as our membership. Couldn't ask for a better group of members. You're involved, you represent our industry with passion, and you always seem to be able to step up when the challenges are in front of you. And lastly, both today and the past 4 meetings, we've had a great group of speakers that have taken time out of their normal day to join us and give us insight and information. So today's speakers, and to all of our speakers that have been part of these regional meetings, I just want to say thank you. With that, John, I will turn things over to you to lead the next part of the meeting.
Sure. So we're going to just go through a few quick Zoom protocols that Muriel's going to go through, and then we're going to turn to Mark Mowry on Log a Load for Kids. So go ahead, Muriel.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to let you know we have 2 speakers. We're going to ask it. They're allowed to go through their whole presentations, and afterward we can do questions and answers. You can, however, send your questions at any time to the chat or the Q&A, or you can text me if you happen to be on a phone. I'm going to go ahead and give you my phone number, 518-330-7684. And I'll just, when it's time for your question, I'll go ahead and release your audio, and you can be part of the conversation. And now please, Mark Mowry, give us a Log a Load for Kids update.
Okay, Muriel, can you hear me? Okay, just a quick update of where we are in 2021 for our charity. It is the ESFPA's charity and our outreach to our local communities through the forest industry. Just looking over where we are on donations so far, we're just above $5,000 received for Log a Load for Kids to date for 2021. That's about 20% of what we raised last year. We raised over $27,000 last year, and we do have a potential donor willing to match every dollar we raise above last year's total. So we've got a long way to go. I'm really looking to some more creativity and more participation. I'm hoping perhaps for the first time in, I think, the 24 years I've done this, to get total board cooperation and total board participation with our charity. I'd like to point out we do have a chainsaw raffle going on Venmo. And until yesterday, we only had about 2 participants in the Venmo chainsaw raffle. We have sales going on at GKS and CJ Logging. They're selling raffle tickets for us for the children's hospitals. We've got 3 loads of firewood donated by Gutchess Lumber, Green Lumber, and Pat Reagan available to bid on. And we're hoping to do a fall craft auction with donations from people that want to donate a craft to Log a Load so we can raise money for the kids' hospitals. I would like to thank Wagner Lumber for stepping out yesterday, and they gave us a large donation. They do every year, and that goes towards the Elmira Hospital, but they gave it in a form of an entry for every one of their employees, 355 employees, towards our chainsaw raffles, which is just it's a great shot in the arm for the people that have donated saws. And it's what we need to do to be creative to raise money for kids. I'd like to thank some of our long-term annual donors over the years, B&B Forest Products and their matching program, Russell Bass and Sons, Cotton Hanlon, Doug Handy, and W.J. Cox, who's always been there with a good solid donation. Every year we've done Log a Load for Kids. How can I say it? We need to help the kids, and looking for your participation, and eager to have some more fun with this all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I just want to encourage everybody, the donations for Log a Load will be opened up till the end of the year. And there'll be some additional items that'll be auctioned off and ticketed off. So please stay tuned to our website as well as our weekly e-news, and you'll be kept up to date on the timeframes for some of those donations that are coming in. So with that, I'd like to welcome our speakers and panel for this morning. I've been saying this evening for the last week and a half. This is, as Mike said, the 5th of our regional meetings and outreach efforts virtually done over the last 2 weeks. And with us today is a perspective on federal climate change legislation and how it may or may not impact states. As many of you know, New York has been up to its eyeballs in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act for the last 3 years. We're right now diligently working with the Climate Action Council, getting our final scoping plan or draft scoping plan out by the end of the year. It is going to have an economy-wide impact in New York, and we are seeing at the national level, both from the White House as well as in both parties in the Senate and the House of Representatives, advancements of various pieces of climate-related legislation. Everybody's focused on it, and we have a great couple of speakers with us today to help bring us up to speed and put in context where federal policy and legislation may be going. So with that, I'd like to introduce Rita Height, who is the Executive Vice President, transitioning to the Chief Executive Officer of the American Forest Foundation. And she's responsible and has been responsible for external relations and policy. And with her is Michael Reed, who's the Vice President for Policy and Advocacy. I gotta say that AFF has been a huge national affiliate partner of ours for years. We do a lot of work with them. Rita's been just outstanding on the policy stage, and we look forward to seeing that continue with her leadership at AFF and with Michael coming on board. So with that, Rita, I'll turn it over to you and get going. Thanks.
Thank you, John, for that introduction, and really good to be with all of you. As a fellow New Yorker, my family still lives in upstate New York, and my mom still lives on our farm with our trees. So really good to be with you all, and always excited to talk to folks from back home. A little bit before I dive into the federal policy landscape, I thought I'd just quickly talk briefly about the American Forest Foundation for those of you that aren't familiar with AFF. We're a conservation organization that works to address critical conservation issues by empowering family landowners in stewardship. And some of you are probably, most of you are probably very familiar with the American Tree Farm System. That's one of our signature programs and has been so for a very long time. And of course, we partner extensively with the Empire State Forest Products Association on both the tree farm system and the work on the ground that we all do with family landowners, but also on the policy space. So just greatly appreciate that partnership, as John mentioned. And just a little bit more about AFF and our policy team. As John mentioned, I currently our Executive Vice President for External Relations and Policy, and I've actually been at AFF for about 12 years now, leading our policy work and as well as a number of our program efforts and other endeavors at the foundation. We also are joined by Michael Reed. Michael is our new Vice President of Policy and Advocacy. He joined AFF, gosh, maybe you might be 2 months on the job, Michael. But we're excited to have Michael on board because he's a veteran Hillite. He's actually been on Capitol Hill for 20 plus years, working with a number of members, most recently with Chairman Sanford Bishop from Georgia, who chairs the Agriculture Appropriations Committee in the House, as well as has a key seat on the House Agriculture Committee. So Michael is no stranger to agriculture and forest issues, and we're really excited to have him on board to lead our policy efforts moving forward. So Michael and I are going to tag team on this conversation, and then look forward to your questions at the end. So what we thought we would do was first start with just a reminder of the promise of forests as a climate solution, but also the challenge that comes with forests as a climate solution. And so, I think some of you may have heard this. I heard one of our landowners actually recently talk about the fact that right now is our moment as a forest sector. We have an incredible opportunity to offer what we do every day, this amazing stewardship that leads to carbon and capture and storage in our forests and forest products. We have an amazing opportunity to contribute to this climate issue in a big way, to be part of the solution and to really be supported in the work that we all do every day. Forests are one of the most significant climate solutions out there and most significant natural climate solutions. If you look at the kind of land-based climate solutions, forests by far are the biggest opportunity. Outsizing agriculture and grasslands and coastal habitats, as well as oceans, et cetera. So a huge opportunity as a land-based solution for forests to not only maintain the current value we're providing with carbon capture and storage, but also to grow that. And if you unpack that a little bit more and say, okay, where does that climate value come from? Where is the potential for us to realize and maximize our climate benefit from our forests and forest products? If you look at the data, you look at the math, this was some research that was done by the Nature Conservancy. Reforestation is by far the largest opportunity, followed very quickly by what's labeled here natural forest management. We like to call this improved forest management. We like to call this really about changing our management to do more to capture and store carbon in the woods. And of course, there's a forest products component to that as well. What's key about this slide is, again, the two biggest opportunities being reforestation and what is called here natural forest management. Natural forest management is actually the cheaper, right? So if you think about forests as a solution to climate change, that work in the woods, in our existing forests, to change our management to do more to capture and store carbon and produce forest products presents one of the most cost-effective solutions in the land-based sector. If we think about forests and as a climate solution, we also need to think about who owns our forests, right? Because that matters. That matters in terms of how we unlock the potential, how we tap forests as a climate solution. And this is a little pie chart of our forests at a national scale. It's actually much different for the state of New York because that pie chart of family landowner proportion actually grows pretty significantly if you just look at New York State. But families and individuals are the largest chunk of forest. Family-owned forests are the largest chunk of our forests in the U.S. Families own more land in the U.S. than corporations. Families own more land in the U.S. than the federal government, which is often a myth. We have to start. we have to actually start first there in the climate conversation, is actually dispelling that myth, because most people think about our forests and they think about again, the federal government, the Forest Service, or they think about large corporations. Doesn't mean the federal government and the large corporations aren't an important piece, but if we're going to unlock forest potential for climate, we have to think about and tap family lands as part of the solution. And another key data point is that if we think about right now, what are the ways that we're trying to unlock forests as a climate solution? The key way that that's happening right now is through carbon markets. Some are voluntary carbon markets, some are regulatory-based carbon markets. But we have a pretty big challenge when we look at those carbon markets. And again, going back to what I said earlier about forest potential, and where is a big chunk of that potential? It's in family lands. And right now, those carbon markets that are out there don't include family lands to any great degree at all. Again, less than 1% of the projects in the current carbon markets, again, both the regulatory and voluntary, are in these small tracts of family land ownership. So if we're going to unlock forest potential, we have to figure out how to unlock family lands, and we have to figure out how to crack this nut around carbon markets. And so shifting a little bit to, if that's our potential in our forests, then what are the policy solutions and tools that can be used to unlock this potential? And we at AFF think about a number of things that need to come in place. There's opportunity, again, for those carbon markets, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And there's opportunity for policy to support and unlock those carbon markets in new and significant ways. There's incentives. There's forest products that need to be a key component of that, because the forest equation doesn't work if we don't also think about and utilize and increase our use of forest products. There's science and data needs, and there's technical assistance needs, particularly with respect to family landowners. So let me just unpack carbon markets for a brief second. This may be familiar to many of you, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, the opportunity for carbon markets around the globe. So of course, what a carbon market is you have an emitter that needs to offset some of that emission that they are producing. And so they buy reductions from another source that's outside of their immediate fence line. And so, as we see corporations make commitments around net zero or carbon reduction commitments, and also as we see policy that's now demanding and calling for carbon reductions, carbon offsets in a carbon market are one of the key strategies to get there. And if you talk to any corporation right now, big corporations, small corporations out there, everyone's trying to do what they can within their own fence line, right, to reduce their emissions. But for the most part, major corporations need offsets, because they cannot just reduce their emissions within their fence line and achieve their net zero goals or their carbon reduction goals. So again, these markets become a key way to achieve those goals, and a key way to drive revenue and support for forests. Because again, going back to, forests can provide an incredible source of carbon capture and storage, and ultimately emissions reductions to meet these goals. We've looked at just the voluntary carbon market alone as AFF, and there's estimates out there about what the potential value of these carbon markets could be. There's an estimate that they could be worth about $50 billion by the end of this decade. And there's other estimates that talk about $90 to $300 billion by 2050. And so with that in mind, and again, thinking about forests and family landowners as a key component of this solution, we think that policy should help unlock these markets and ensure that family landowners can be part of the solution and can have access to resources that support their stewardship on the ground. So what are some policy tools that we advocate for at the federal level in particular that can open up carbon markets and help us unlock this potential? There's a number of things that policy can do. And frankly, most of these things that we're talking about here, whether they're loan guarantees, incentives, the government serving as a buyer of last resort, in low cost insurance products, science and inventory and technical assistance. These are all things that are very familiar to, in particular, USDA, because we already do many of these things for other things that agriculture and forestry produce. Think commodity markets. Think about the work that USDA does to provide loans and loan guarantees for traditional agriculture commodities. Or think about the investments that USDA is making in science and data and inventory to support traditional commodities. Well, if we think about carbon as yet another commodity, again, USDA can use and other agencies can use some of those key things that they do for traditional commodities to help unlock markets for carbon. This, again, this is very familiar, and there are ways to do this to, again, unlock those markets and provide a low touch government intervention, right? This doesn't need to be that the government does all of the work. It's about how does the government unlock the power of the private sector, unlock the power of private finance, unlock the power of private landowners stepping up. Another key way that forest potential can be unlocked is through incentive programs. And this is a space that many of us are very familiar with. USDA has operated incentives programs for environmental outcomes for a very long time. They're known as programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program within the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So these are very familiar and should be absolutely an essential component of the solution. How do we both, improve how we're delivering incentive programs today to achieve carbon and climate goals while achieving other important goals, but how do we actually enhance them? How do we grow these programs? Because again, they're going to be important for that climate goal and unlocking that climate goal, but also help landowners achieve their own objectives. One of the key challenges with incentives as a key piece of the solution is these types of programs tend to be really hard to measure performance around. And there's a lot of work that USDA is doing to try to measure performance, but these don't tend to be as rigorous and as measurable in achieving measurable climate goals as some other things like carbon markets. Again, an important suite of the policy tool, but not the only tool. And I get this question a lot. Well, why can't we just ramp up EQIP? This is something that forest owners are familiar with, our foresters are familiar with. We're building these partnerships with NRCS. Why don't we just maximize this? And we are all for that. We are all for growing these programs. But if you compare the current, for example, entire investment in EQIP at a national level, it's roughly around $5 billion. Versus, again, going back to that point around the carbon markets, the estimates of those markets being worth about $50 billion. And so again, doesn't mean that EQIP is an important strategy and we shouldn't grow it. But if we just focus on those incentives programs as the only mechanism, we're going to significantly miss an opportunity for the forest sector to be part of the solution and to drive resources for the stewardship that we know is important in the landscape. Another piece I mentioned, forest products. We cannot achieve our climate goals without figuring out how we displace products that are fossil fuel based and therefore have a higher emissions portfolio. Going back to the forest, we know that markets actually drive more work in the woods that's going to add climate value, whether that's driving landowners to want to plant more trees, driving the management that's needed to support climate action, and just frankly, keeping our forests as forests. Markets are essential. And so you get a twofer with forest products. You again get that value in terms of displacing products that have a more intensive emissions portfolio, and you get the value of driving more climate action in the woods. And so forest products need to be an essential component of the strategy. Right now, most of the conversation at the federal level around policy and climate and forest products is around long-lived wood products in buildings. And there's a lot of momentum and opportunity there. A lot of the mass timber projects and growth that we've seen in the market, huge opportunities there. There's less certainty, but I think, and we think at AFF, huge potential for some of the other forest products that we know have an incredible climate value, but there's not as much kind of shoulder to the wheel behind these products yet. And there's more work that needs to be done in the policy space around that, from paper and packaging and chemicals to the biomass energy issue, which is of course very, very complicated and something that's not clear yet in the climate policy conversation. So I am actually going to turn now to my colleague, Mike Reed, as I introduced earlier, to talk about what are some of the opportunities Congress is looking at right now and what is in those packages for forests and the forest product sector. Michael.
Thank you, Rita. And by the way, I'm a New Yorker as well. I was born and raised in Buffalo. In terms of federal opportunities, go to the next slide. It's very interesting. The Biden administration, when he first came in, if you were to take a look at the budget, his first budget, in every single federal agency or federal department, there is a major thrust in terms of climate activity. The first in history, right? Quite frankly, in terms of the executive branch. So they're going to be very active and will continue to be active. Another issue that has come up is the whole issue of underserved landowners and how they relate to climate. There has been a number of activities in that area in terms of expanding opportunities for underserved landowners and forest owners. Of course, we have the existing CRP programs. There's also, just last week, Secretary Vilsack announced a new initiative. It was named Climate Smart Agriculture and Forestry. It includes right at $1 billion for new innovative projects and pilot programs, quite frankly, in the climate space. It's kind of it's actually unheard of in terms of activities that the USDA has undertaken in this area. Next slide. So I think we all know that in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, that the Democrats have a very, particularly in the House, have a very slim margin. You've got 220 Democrats, you have 212 Republicans, and therefore the House, the leadership of the Democratic leadership of the House has a very difficult and tedious task in terms of making sure that anything they bring to the floor, they can pass. And I think you see the issue now, particularly over in the Senate, where there's a 50-50 split with the vice president having the deciding vote. it would appear, for example, that we're now getting closer, or already they announced this today that they have a deal on the debt limit that will only last until December, however. But in the Senate in particular, in next slide. Well, yeah, I'll go to the Senate in a minute. So there are several opportunities that we have facing in Congress. Infrastructure, budget resolution, reconciliation, the regular appropriations process, and the upcoming election, depending on how you look at it, and then long-term, the 2023 Farm Bill. Next slide. There's several bills right now that have been introduced that specifically deal with forest management and creating opportunities for forests. The Rural Forest Markets Act, a bill that we've been involved in, is basically aimed at providing financial conduits for the development of a carbon market through loan guarantees. It's been introduced in the House. It's under consideration by the Senate Ag Committee, and Chairman Stabenow has been a major supporter, and we're working with Senator Bozeman to get he's not quite on board yet, but once we're very close to having him on board, and we feel that once we can get that taken care of, we may in fact make some movement later this year on that bill. The Growing Climate Solutions Act, the Trillion Trees Act, the SOS for Seedlings Act, the Disaster Reforestation Act, and Revegetation and Carbon Sequestration Act. All again are aimed at strengthening not only our forest landowners, but also creating greater opportunities in terms of our carbon market and opening up the carbon market for our landowners. Next slide. So what's in the infrastructure bill for climate? There's a total of $5.75 billion for restoring, monitoring, and researching forest activity, $3.3 million for wildfire risk mitigation, $200 million for reforestation for both public lands and private lands, and Replant Act, reforestation in national forests. Next. So what's in the reconciliation bill? And when we talk about reconciliation, it's actually been in the news quite a bit. But there is, and I believe this is a House bill, there's $9 billion investment in wildfire risk reduction on private lands, 1.25 billion investment in climate action in private lands, 200 million in FIA and carbon measuring and monitoring, 50 million investment in USFS research on carbon benefits of specific forest practices, and additional spending on state forest action plans, wood innovation grants, civilian climate corps, and state forest assistance, etc. But as a background, in total, the House reconciliation package has approximately $22 billion devoted to forest activity in these areas and others. However, the package that the Senate has pulled together actually includes just a tad over 40 billion in funding for forest-related activities. And this is all new money. This is not in the normal appropriations process. This is in addition to what has been included and proposed in the appropriations bills. However, you've heard about the negotiations particularly on the Democratic side with Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, and their call for a much smaller amount of money in the total reconciliation bill. The Senate leadership is proposing a proposal that will come to something like 3.5 trillion, I believe. And Senator Manchin and Sinema have said that they don't want to spend any more than 1.5. If you do the math, when we're talking about the $40 billion proposal for forest in the Senate bill, if we were to come out with the total bill of 1.5, that would mean that we're basically looking at somewhere around a 50% reduction in the proposed funds. So that would be pretty tough, but still it's new money and additional money. So it's a win-win for forest and forest interests all the way around. I think, Rita, I think I'm pretty close to finished because I've covered both appropriations in that one little piece too. So, and I'm open for any questions at the end of the bill. Well, yeah.
Yeah, sure, Michael, if you want me to take back for just a second to wrap up here, I think, you know, what Michael's described is the kind of opportunities in front of us right now in Congress. And just to put a fine point on Michael's actually tripping over, is it trillion or billion? That's scary, by the way. But to put that in perspective, right? So if we're talking about a $40 billion or even a $20 billion investment in forests, that's about 4 times the current Forest Service budget. That's about 4 times the current EQIP budget, right? So again, we're talking about a pretty significant investment in forests. And I go back to why. Because right now is our moment as a forest sector, because Congress is actually seeing that forest and forest products are an essential component of the climate solution, and recognizing that our sector is essential to contributing to this pressing issue that we all are facing. That is an amazing phenomenon in a place that I think a lot of us have wanted to be for a very long time, because we know all of the great things that our forests do. And so we're again, it's exciting to see that we're finally getting that recognition as a sector of the great value that we provide. A couple of things that I just want to wrap up, and then we'll talk just a minute about states. So, you know, just some things to keep in mind as we all work together on climate policy, a few observations that we've seen around kind of what do we need to do to be successful? And I go back to that example of like, now is our moment. We're no longer at the little kids table. We're actually, which is where we have been for a very long time, and we've been frustrated. We're actually at the big kids table right now, and we're contributing in a meaningful way. And that comes with some requirements of us. It comes with a requirement that we're credible, that we actually produce real emissions reductions and real carbon value. It comes with a requirement that, we ensure that the voice, the essential constituency that we are, is in the room, right? And I think many of us have talked about the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector has a huge voice. And why doesn't the forest sector have a similar voice? We're starting to see that now. It's again our opportunity. A couple of key things that we see in the policy space are, the need to keep things voluntary. As AFF, we believe that we are actually going to get more work done in the woods, get more value in terms of the clean air and the water and the wildlife if we use voluntary tools to work with private landowners. And so that's a key theme that we see and hear a lot, and again, is really resonating with the Hill. And then, this other key theme around leveraging the private sector. There's no question that Congress wants to see that, the federal government isn't the only one in the game, and that we find solutions that leverage the private sector. So just real quickly, what does this mean for states? John mentioned at the beginning, that New York is really in the throes of you all's climate policy, and really appreciate John and the Empire State Forest Products Association's leadership navigating that, because I know it's been very thorny. But what does these kind of near-term opportunities mean? There's an opportunity to leverage that federal investment to support your state goals. So how do we think about aligning what you all are doing at the state level and using that to unlock more resources at the federal level for the work? And it also means that states like New York, who are already in the game on climate, are actually going to have a leg up, because all of these dollars, again, come with climate requirements, right? And those states that are already pursuing that are going to be much more ready to compete than others that aren't. And then again, I think what we see in a lot of the policy is that this policy can actually be used to leverage and support that state work. It's very flexible pots of money that Michael described in both the infrastructure package and the budget reconciliation package. And so there's a lot of opportunity to kind of really support kind of innovative state action and make that happen, that can be modeled for other states. This question around, is any federal climate policy going to preempt or override some state policies that we may or may not like? Things like biomass policy, which we know is kind of a patchwork at the state level. Things like some states are setting carbon offset requirements and mandates that we may or may not like. Could federal climate policy get there and kind of overriding some of those state requirements? Perhaps. I don't see that right now, and Michael may agree or disagree. I don't see that right now in what Congress is debating today. Right now, the approach that Congress is taking is not a regulatory approach. It's an approach of, let's pump money into this. Let's pump investment into this to unlock the climate potential. So with that, I think, John, please feel free to add anything, and I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that last one is an important point, how the feds will treat this going forward. I've heard two perspectives: that one, they'll attempt to establish a level playing field so states aren't competing with each other. We're very nervous in New York about the potential for leakage and then the net impact of that. Our sense is, in a heavily regulated state like New York, if you leak a manufacturing facility and it goes to most any other state or out of country, you've really done a net negative on climate. It's going to likely have a bigger greenhouse gas footprint, and it's going to have a bigger environmental footprint. And I'll be curious how the modeling takes that into consideration. But at the moment, one of the big concerns we have is our manufacturing will be at a significant disadvantage in terms of trying to comply with the climate requirements that we're going to have compared to other states at the moment. So that's a huge concern for us. And I would think nationally that's going to be a big concern as well. Because we know, in the last 50 years, we've lost a lot of manufacturing that is in heavy greenhouse gas countries at the moment. So how that policy will frame around that will be very interesting to see. So with that, folks, if they want to unmute, if you have any questions, we're ready to take some questions of Rita and Michael. So feel free to do that. All right, anybody else have any questions they might want to bring up at this point? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, John, just curious on the speaker's insight of, we're seeing this climate policy, whether it's on the emissions side, and I suspect then, filtering down to the offsets side, it's really, different states are in different positions, and yet this is not just a state, this issue and, policy work doesn't just end at a state boundary. And I'm just curious to know on the forest side of the equation, if there has been collaboration across trying to align some of this, I'll call state by state climate policy work to something that's more national, so that we don't get in a position where one state is advantaged or disadvantaged in a commercial space for forest products.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive in, and John, jump in here too, because a lot of what's happening at the state level. A couple things to just add to your point, Michael. Not only do we have to think about the kind of patchwork of state policy, but if we're talking about carbon markets are global, right?
Yeah.
And so we not only have the state issues we have to think about, but what is the EU doing to set policy that's driving corporations to choose to do offsets in a certain way, for example, here in the US. And so there's kind of a huge patchwork here of things. So a couple things that we at AFF are doing, and again, I would love for John to jump in. One, we are participating at that global level, right? So there's actually a number of entities, but one in particular, it's called the Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets. It's all about a global attempt to say, like, let's actually get some consistency so that what we're doing in Indonesia and we're calling in a carbon credit is the equivalent of what we're doing in New York State. And so that we actually have some credibility and some rigor around those markets. There's, lots of ways that could go sideways for us as a forest sector too, which is why we think it's really important for us to be in that conversation. So we're in that conversation, and there's a lot of work we're trying to do at that level to again, help shape the policies so that they will support and enable credible forest carbon to participate in the markets. And then
yeah,
please,
go ahead. No, I was just going to say, with respect to the offsets in New York's climate law, it's very difficult and challenging. Right now, New York's climate law says if you're going to use an offset, and it's up to DEP to decide if they want to do that or not, the offset has to be used. In other words, the carbon sale has to be deployed to a consumer of those credits within 25 miles of the same county to which they were generated. So how does that play out on a statewide basis? Because we know most of the carbon offsets are going to be probably in the manufacturing center, probably in some of the transportation sector, and in more urbanized environments where our forests tend not to be, and certainly well outside of 25 miles. So how that plays out. On the other hand, New York forest landowners already are playing in both the regulatory and the voluntary marketplace right now. And we're supporting and looking into, because we think it's a great opportunity to help bring another market, so to speak, to forest landowners, particularly the landowners that otherwise aren't in any other forest market, if we want to keep our forest as forest. And if they choose to do that, what will New York do in terms of accounting for that? New York will want to say, great, we're keeping the forest as forest, but at the same time, those credits are being sold globally or across the country. And we're not sure what's going to happen. We've seen California kind of backtrack on its regulatory market, saying we'd like to get more of those credits purchased in California. It's had tremendous success nationally. It's a very lucrative, very financially beneficial market for those that can participate at that level.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see how all this starts to come out in both the incentives that might be there for landowners to participate, and then secondly, the accounting that's going to happen. Because you're right, we could go sideways real quick on carbon offsets, and there's a lot of folks that don't think carbon offsets should be in the arena. A fair amount of the environmental justice community is, they're the ones that limited New York's offset. They were very much afraid that offsets were going to be deployed in disadvantaged communities, and they would continue to suffer the brunt of a lot of pollution, so to speak. So it's going to be interesting how this all starts to play out. But go ahead if you had more to add on that.
No, please. I'm good if we've answered Michael's question. And so I'm happy to jump into another.
Well, I'm not sure we've got anybody that
I have one more. It's with regards to offsets, and there's a lot of, from what I've observed in the some of the climate work when it comes to forest management. There appears to be, and rightfully so, a large focus on growing forests, but maybe less focus on that explicit linkage to the importance of forest products coming off of those forests. And so my question is this: AFF, are you equally promoting the value of forest products and the importance of the industry in the hand that it plays in the management of family forests? And two, do you see us ending up in a position where forest products are somewhat competing against offsets, where it's an either-or situation when it comes to value for a forest landowner?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Michael, that's a really key question, and I'm really glad you asked it, because this is something that we're pretty passionate about at AFF. So we have for a very long time, and expect in the future to work very closely with the forest product sector, because we fundamentally believe that forest products are not only important in and of themselves, but also help drive the kind of stewardship that we all want to see on the ground. And so as we've embarked in the work around forest carbon with family landowners, we've worked with the Nature Conservancy to build a program called the Family Forest Carbon Program. And our approach and focus with that program is we need to make it work alongside forest products markets, because we know how important those markets are for the future. And the other key thing, again, forget if you care or don't care about the forest product sector. If you think about the climate equation, right? If you think about the whole goal in our forests is to add carbon value, right? In our forests and our forest products, right? We want to capture and store more. And if in doing that, if we're encouraging a landowner to say, stop harvesting and not produce, not generate, timber to produce a product, that's fine for that landowner, but that carbon then is going to be harvested someplace else. And in the carbon world, that's called leakage, right? And so what we think, in order to generate additional carbon value, again, we can work with landowners who do or don't want to harvest, but we have to account for that carbon that has to go someplace else. And so instead of stopping harvest or preventing harvesting, we think the better strategy to get additional carbon is to actually work with landowners to continue to produce timber in ways that are actually going to lead to more carbon in the woods and more carbon in the products. Our strategy is, let's work alongside those markets, because they're essential to this carbon equation in the long term. And to John's point earlier, if we stop harvesting, we stop producing forest products here in the US or in New York State, it's going to go someplace else. And that may or may not have lesser environmental standards. And so instead of pushing that out, let's work alongside it. And we think there is a key way, and we're already doing that work in our pilots through the Family Forest Carbon Program in key states.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how to look at leakage as you're leaking demand as opposed to just leaking, let's say, a manufacturing facility or something. And one of the interesting things is we know that demand for bio-based products is just going to go up. And the question is, where will the source of fiber, timber, and energy from biofuels be derived from? And wouldn't you want it derived from the more sustainably managed forests, such as in the Northeast, as opposed to putting them somewhere else around the globe. And that's going to be a key challenge. And I don't know how you necessarily control it, because the demand is going to be a global demand. Let's face it, it's going to come out of developing nations that are, lesser developed today and hopes of being developed tomorrow. We're seeing it, in Asia, we're seeing it in China, we're seeing it in Indonesia, we're seeing it in India, and they're going to sooner or later demanding those same products. I was seeing a stat on the global demand for plastics. It's just through the roof. And those are all currently or largely petroleum based. If they become bio-based, will we be able to meet the global demand for plastics that is out there, which is not going to diminish anytime too soon. So very interesting stuff.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael and Rita. I really appreciate your presentation. And as Muriel said, we're recording these. We have a lot of views that have already been on the other 4, and these will be out there later this evening. So we appreciate your time. We've got some business matters that we need to deal with. So anybody's welcome to stay on to watch that, or if you need to get back to your